Have you ever met a chronic liar? What was their worst lie? Her dad hired an assassin to kill her and her mother and was in jail. She mentioned a couple of weeks later that she was going to her dad's house for the weekend. She would point at anyone remotely attractive and say I've slept with them. She tried to fake a phone call once pretending to talk to a boy she was seeing. So I called her phone and it rang. While she was mid-sentence, she stuttered in embarrassment and then said, "You calling me must have cut my call off." I told her to ring him back and she refused. If you had fish and chips for dinner, then she had had shark and chips. She was absolutely relentless and we stopped being friends when I called her out on her BS. I worked with a guy like this. Every story was a lie. He told me he surveyed the football stadium in our town prior to its construction. I checked the dates. He was a qualified surveyor at 6 years old. Then he told me his body chemistry was immune to acid. You could pour battery acid on him and it would not affect him. There were dozens of small ones and a few real big ones. Just that every single story anyone had to share, he had a story to top that one. Got high score on a game. He got higher. Had an awesome vacation. His was better. Climbed a mountain. So did he, but without fear. Got into a bar fight. He once fought 4 dudes at once. It was like that every single time. I currently have a work friend like that. Even though those are the only lies she tells, as far as I'm aware at least. It's super annoying and I'm looking forward to not having to see her almost every day. She's also super self-absorbed and can only talk about herself and doesn't seem to care about you at all. She talks very loudly too, which just adds to the annoyance factor. I went to high school with a pathological liar that you could just nudge a tiny bit and he'd go off on these long, elaborate and impossible stories. You'd just say, "And then what happened, Ricky?" and he'd just keep going. The best one was when he supposedly got chased by a police helicopter through the woods while stashing an 18-pack of beer down his pants. He ended up outrunning the helicopter, and because of it the police said "You're cool" over the loudspeaker on the helicopter that he said he had outran. I worked with a guy who had some issues. He got big into paracord bracelets and was always trying to sell them to people at work. He once told us he fell out of a tree hunting, took his paracord bracelet off, managed to tie his foot off to a branch while falling, then hanging upside down immediately shot a deer. My old co-worker was a chronic liar and was constantly telling absolute whoopers. He purchased illegal substances from our other co-worker on credit. We worked at a Shaw's Deli, so this type of activity was quite normal. Well, big mistake on her part, because this guy never had his wallet, or just spent his last dollar, and so on and so forth. Finally she gets sick of it and says, "Listen, tomorrow is payday, so I want the money you owe me." We all end up working together the day after payday. She of course asks for her money. His response, "Guy, the craziest thing happened to me last night. After work I went out to the bar and I met this French girl. She was an absolute smoke show. Hottest girl you've ever seen, etc. We have a few drinks and really hit it off. I end up back at her place and of course I smashed. I drive home and go to bed. The next day I realized that I left my pants at her apartment. So I drive back to her place and knock on the door. Her roommate answers. I say, "Is Bianca home?" She says no. She went back to France. The B was a foreign exchange student. She took my pants with her and my paycheck was in the back pocket. Now, I want to point out that he was not joking in the slightest and tried to present this as something that actually happened. If I remember correctly, I actually slow clapped for him at the end of his story because it was such a magnificent display of fantastic bullsh. My favorite part is that he somehow drove home without pants but didn't notice. I got this. My sister is a compulsive liar, among many other things. Growing up, kids would stop by our house to see our new puppy's point that we didn't have. My friend had a baby. She took photos and told people at school it was hers. She hasn't held a job longer than 3 months in her almost 40 years of life. Yet, she tells people she was a nurse, a police officer, a 911 operator. She tells people we don't speak because she needed a kidney transplant, and I refuse to offer her mine. She doesn't need one. She left one company after telling them that she had an incurable disease. Doctor's orders for bed rest She let fellow employees throw a party for her at another company, 2 months employed, because they found a cure for this incurable disease. She told my mom she won the Best Undercover Police Officer of the Year award and got a trophy. She sent my mom a photo, to which my mom posted it on Facebook. It was the World Cup trophy. She had faked numerous pregnancies, downloading fake ultrasound pics and everything. Has the baby showers. Loses said fake baby. She had her tubes tied many years ago. She then returns the gifts for money to support her drug habit. In regards to said drug habit, she once stabbed herself to get pain medication. She is blacklisted from urgent cares within a 200-mile radius. She lost custody of her kids several years ago, yet still tells people they were kidnapped and she doesn't know where they are. She does. She claimed she was the first person in our state to get COVID. The doctors thought she was dying until they found the right medicine and now call her a medical miracle. She is waiting for her story in the upcoming medical journal. I could write a book with her stories. She needs help, but that would require her to admit there is a problem. People have sought me out to ask me if this or that is true. I love being honest. I confront her on these stories and I'm the bad person for doubting her. Bye bye crazy. My ex-husband, he lied as easily as he breathed. He would make up conversations that never happened, events that didn't happen, etc. Eventually it got to the point I didn't believe a single word he said. Master manipulator with his lies. 2. Example. He drove my car to work one day because I needed to use his pickup truck. When he came home he asked if I knew someone who drove some certain kind of car. I did not. He proceeds to tell me this car chased him down some back roads and shot at him. For no reason. He was just driving AMD. They started tailgating and getting aggressive. So he took to the back roads. I'm like, dude, what the hell kind of people do you think I know? And what stuff do you think I'm into? It completely didn't happen. But he was very accusatory to me about it, that clearly these were people I knew and had given a reason to try to kill me / whoever was driving my car. My mom was a very heavy drug user and would make up all sorts of things. She told me she had a different name that she went by when she was famous, and would point out pictures of models and actresses that somewhat resembled her and tell me, look, that's mommy. But the worst lie by far was that she had a chronic illness and that her doctor prescribed her medication that she had to either snort or smoke that I couldn't tell anyone about. She ended up accidentally burning our home down, baking donuts. Meth lab. Shortly after I moved in with my dad, I was smart enough after a while to know what she was doing, and it was my dream to see her again and help her make things better. She died of a fentanyl overdose days before I was supposed to visit her. We had a kid at my high school who was obsessed with convincing everyone he was rich. He would always talk about his dad's Lambus, how he didn't have a job but had money coming in. It was interesting because no one would ask, and he'd just keep pushing the lie. Eventually he posted a bank account photo on FB to prove how rich he was, and it was literally the first Google result, big bank account. It was sad. Oh lord. Finally I get to talk about Jonathan. I met Jonathan my first day working in a call center in court right after college. We started our day walking around the building to see the fire exits, cafeteria, mailroom, etc. And this was when Jonathan told us he grew up in Anaheim, CA, and was the youngest person in CA history to get his pilot's license. Wow was the general consensus. That's pretty neat. About a year later we found out he was born and raised in Connecticut. As time went by he made a lot of claims that people thought was pretty odd. He spoke several languages fluently: Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Chinese, which isn't odd by itself, but he also seemed kind of like a moron, so it wasn't believable. His claims weren't inherently crazy, but he always chimed in on topics, basically saying he was an expert building computers, computer programming, woodworking, etc. At this point I just thought he was your run-of-the-mill pathological liar. That was until early December I saw him in the break room and he asked me how I was. Good. And you? To be honest, I'm exhausted. I've been staying up every night whittling German dolls for people here for Christmas gifts. Wow. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. Do you want one? Sure. I didn't get one for Christmas. No one else from work had heard or received one of these things. It was just a random lie from his twisted mind. Another time we had a potluck and Jonathan brought in a cake. The cake was clearly purchased from a bakery as it was professionally made and came in the bakery box. He made a point to tell people he woke up at 2 AM to bake the cake. When it was pointed out the box had the name of the bakery on it, he said it was just a bakery box he had at his house. Another time I was on break and was going to run down to the gas station for an energy drink when I saw him getting out of a minivan and shuffling to work. He normally drove a sedan. He jogs over to me and goes back quote, "I'm sorry I'm late." Obviously I didn't care, I just worked there. Back quote, "I was T-boned by an old man on my way in, so I had to get a ride back to my house and use my wife's car." Back quote, "Holy seriously, are you okay? Why did you even come to work?" Back quote, "Yeah, I'm okay." The next day Jonathan drove his red sedan into work and there was clearly no damage. He never mentioned the car accident again and no one else had heard about it. I ended up moving out to San Diego and kept the job to work remotely. On my last day Jonathan saw me outside and I stopped to say bye to him. He said bye and then told me he found a publisher for the book he wrote. Back quote, "It's about when I was molested as a child." Back quote, "Dude, I'm so sorry, but that's cool you wrote a book." Back quote, "Yeah, thanks, I'm pretty excited." I left not even knowing if that was a lie. I honestly have no idea if he just made up he was molested on the spot because he just had to think up a ridiculous lie, or if maybe it was true and it was part of the reason he acted the way he did. Now this last part is where everyone will think I'm lying, but I swear on my life and everything I love that after I went to San Diego the FBI came and took his computer from work. He had some role in a local church, youth pastor maybe, and he was caught with something like 6K pictures of inappropriate stuff including pictures of people getting hurt. Sometimes people will say back quote, "Oh, I never expected he would do something like that," but no. In this case I didn't even bat an eye. When I heard the news, I just showed the article to my wife and said back quote, "You know that guy Jonathan I always tell you about? I told you he was effed up." Knew this guy in high school. Everyone in my then friend group remembers this guy and his crazy lies. He was 16 at the time I knew him. He hacked into Microsoft and built them a better firewall. He owned a commercial fishing boat. He lived on Antarctica for 6 months before coming to our school. In a video game, he beat a level that just straight up doesn't exist. He said he beat said level with another friend of mine who was right there and denied it, saying he didn't know what the guy was talking about. He continued to say it was true and that my friend just didn't remember. It had just happened at class before lunch. Various tech lies, like he had a laptop with a terabyte of RAM. Not even possible now in 2022. This was in 2005. Various lies about women he had slept with. He said anything and everything he could that would make him feel better. By instance, I ran into a classmate 5 years after graduation on a plane ride from Seattle to back home. Our flight out of our connection got delayed, so we agreed to split the cost of a rental car and just drive the 4 hours home. Turns out she had had a kid with the guy, and yet he still was just as much of a pathological liar then. My dad had narcissistic personality disorder. He would constantly lie and manipulate us growing up. Never physical abuse but a lot of verbal, mental and emotional. When I turned 16, 25 now, I cut him out of my life completely. Didn't talk to him again until last September when I got news he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I messaged him, and then my uncle took me to surprise visit him a couple weeks later in October. I could tell his mental illness was still there, but I could tell he really loved me and was so happy to see me again. And while we were talking, he looked me in the eyes and said, "I know I messed up. I know I really messed up with you guys, and it haunts me every day." I grabbed his hand and told him, "I hope you know I love you and I forgive you." My dad was a tough guy. I never saw him cry, but he turned his head, bedridden, took a few deep breaths, and said thank you. That was the last coherent conversation I had with him. 2 weeks later he was in hospice and on so many painkillers he could barely talk. He died just a month after he and I both got closure. The last words he spoke to me on his deathbed were, "Never forget how much I love you." I know this isn't necessarily what the thread is about, but I wanted to share it for people with parents, siblings, or anyone else in your life that is mentally ill and compulsively dishonest, it's not always a sad ending. People really can and really do change. Not everyone, but if you're holding on to hope someone will change, don't feel like it's in vain. I lost hope, but I still made up with my dad. This will probably get buried, but if even one person sees this and is comforted, I'm glad.